to welcome you on this Memorial Day weekend. I hope you're all safe. And today's topic is from a Sannyasini's diary, Memories of Great Monks. And today I'd like to share with you some reminiscences of Swami Ashishananda, Holy Mother's disciple, who lived from 1899 to 1996. In this particular photograph, the lower photograph shows Swamis in this country. And in the front row to the extreme left is Swami Ashishananda. And these monks were all gathered on the occasion of my guru's memorial service in 1976. Swami Ashishananda had been Swami Pravarananda's assistant at the Vedanta Society of Southern California until 1955, when he was posted as head of the Vedanta Society of Portland. And during my time as a young nun in the Vedanta Society of Southern California, Swami Ashishananda came once to perform the inauguration of a newly built Hollywood convent building in 1973, and which is now a monastery. And in July 1976, he came as the senior-most Swami at Swami Pravarananda's memorial service. After the service at the Hollywood Center, he, along with other heads of centers in the United States, came to Santa Barbara to give a second service and spend time with the convent members there. And as the Swamis were leaving for the airport, Swami Ashishananda shared with us an intimate experience that he had at the Portland Center on the night of Swami Pravarananda's Mahasamadhi, which occurred a few minutes past midnight on July 4th, 1976, the bicentennial year. Swami Ashishananda told us, maybe it's just my imagination, but on July 4th, I was awake. I heard Swami Pravarananda's voice, Brother Kiran, I have gone to the feet of Maharaj. Maharaj being Swami Brahmananda, his guru. The Swami continued, right after that, I got the phone call from the Vedanta Society of Southern California that Swami Pravarananda had passed away. Now this was Swami Ashishananda, always cloaking his spiritual life with humility. Maybe it's just my imagination, he had told us, but we all knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was his experience. Swami Ashishananda was a man of God, intimately connected with the spiritual realm. And this he showed by the power of his life and his teachings. So allow me to share with you some of those incidents and teachings that have stayed with me these last 45 years. He often talked about his initiation day. He was introduced to Sri Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother, and the spiritual consort and wife of Sri Ramakrishna, by Rash Bihari Maharaj. And in their pre-monastic days, Swami Akhilananda, who founded and later became the head of the Boston and Providence centers, and young Kiran used to go to the house of Balaram Bose, a very close householder disciple of Ramakrishna, to have the darshan of Swami Brahmananda, known simply as Maharaj. Now, one evening, Maharaj was not present, so they walked to the Udbodhan, which was about a 10 or 15-minute walk, where they knew Sri Sarada Devi was staying. Swami Dhirananda, senior monk of the order, met them and asked young Kiran outright, who will take your responsibility? And Swami, this young Kiran, who had studied Kant, Hegel, and Plato, used to tell us what he said in reply. I am a rugged individualist. I can take my own responsibility, meaning he didn't need any guru. Then Swami Dhirananda said, you do not know anything about spiritual life. In spiritual life, there should be a teacher, a guide who holds the torch and shows you the way. Suppose you go into a cave temple, which is all dark. And if you are alone, you bump your head on the walls. But if you find a priest who holds the torch, then you can see the deity unhurt and be satisfied. Kiran said, what do you mean? And Swami Dhirananda said, Holy Mother is upstairs. You should go and ask for her grace to initiate you into spiritual life. The first time Kiran saw Mother, Rash Behari Maharaj, a brahmachari attendant, took him upstairs at the Udbodhan. And Sri Sarda Devi was veiled. She was often veiled on the days that the young men or elder men would come to the Udbodhan, Tuesdays and Saturdays. And Rash Behari Maharaj told Kiran not to speak. So he simply prostrated, touched her feet, and returned downstairs. Swami Dhirananda was waiting. Well, did you ask for initiation? Kiran replied, no, I wasn't permitted to speak. Swami Dhirananda then took him back upstairs and explained to Holy Mother that Kiran was a Brahmin, that he had spiritual association with Swami Brahmananda, and was a college student. The second time Kiran saw Sarda Devi, she was unveiled. And Kiran asked for initiation. But Sarda Devi replied, why, my child? You go to Rakal, meaning Swami Brahmananda. Rakal can give you initiation. So why ask me? Then Kiran blurted out, Mother, if you shower your grace, I will consider it a great blessing and privilege and my good fortune. Sarda Devi then said, come after 2 days. At that time, Kiran was only 17 years old. He didn't know about the Divine Mother. It was Swami Saradananda, a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, that opened his eyes. Also, he was worried about the mantra Mother would give, as he already had a chosen ideal. On the day of initiation, Mother performed the worship and initiated him. And in Swami's own words, the mantra rang a bell in my heart. Swami used to reminisce. And Kiran returned in 2 days with his rosary, and Sarda Devi showed him how to use it and how to meditate on the Ishta. Swami Saradananda came into Kiran's life on the first day he saw Holy Mother. On that day, Kiran had left his shoes at the bottom of the stairs leading to Sri Sarda Devi's room at the Udbodhan. And when he came downstairs and began talking with Swami Dhirananda, he heard a booming voice from the next room. Let the boy who has left his shoes on the threshold come here. He followed the voice to the next room, and there, dominating the room, was an imposing figure of Swami Saradananda, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna and General Secretary of the Order. Do these shoes belong to you? Swami Saradananda asked. Yes, Maharaj. By keeping them on the threshold, you inconvenience others. You should have put them where they belong, under the staircase. This stern rebuke awakened fear in young Kiran, and he avoided the Swami for 4 years afterwards, though later he became Swami Saradananda's personal attendant. Once I smiled on hearing Swami Ashishananda scolding a young woman devotee in the same way, as she had, without thinking, left her shoes on the threshold of the center's library doorway. In this way, when we come within the orbit of the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition, the teachings and even the scoldings from our teachers are handed down from Sri Ramakrishna himself, as in this case, when a seemingly small outward behavior reflects an inner impediment that great souls can clearly see and then try to root out. Though in ecstasy, throughout the day, Sri Ramakrishna was methodical in his actions. And taught his disciples to be precise in all that they undertook. In this way, one's outer and inner life become orderly. Once Swami Turiyananda, direct disciple of Ramakrishna, borrowed a penknife from Sri Ramakrishna's room in order to peel fruits for a picnic they were all having at the Panchavati at Dakshineshwar. But on returning it, he put it in a different place. Sri Ramakrishna then trained his young disciple. If you put it in a different place, I will have to hunt for it everywhere. Always remember to return a thing where you found it. One day, Swami Saradananda called Kiran to his room and asked if he would be able to take dictation and write his letters. And so Kiran became Swami Saradananda's personal secretary at the Udbodhan from 1921 to 1927. That relationship lasted long after Holy Mother's passing. One day, Swami Ashishananda asked Swami Saradananda, Holy Mother instructed me in a very simple way. She didn't ask me to repeat the mantra for a fixed number of times in the morning or in the evening, or for special days. She did not give me any fixed method. I want a step-by-step method. Can you give me that? Swami Saradananda replied, you are the greatest fool. Holy Mother is the Divine Mother herself. All these methods and procedures are given by other teachers, but not by Holy Mother. Whatever Holy Mother has given you is the last word in spiritual life. Cling to the mantra, repeat it, meditate, and think of your chosen ideal. And when the longing for the vision of God comes, you will find that your mind will know it, that your mind will be fixed on the divine spirit, and that all your desires will be fulfilled. In this connection, Swami Ashishananda used to relate how a young devotee, Chandra Mohan Datta, disciple of Sri Sarada Devi, used to go to the Udbodhan for her darshan. But he would simply take the dust of her feet and blurt out, "Prasad," which she would then give him. One day, Swami Shuddhananda, who later became president of the order, instructed the shy Chandra, ask Mother for liberation, not prasad. So Chandra climbed the stairs of the Udbodhan that day and entered her room where she sat, fully veiled. He prostrated, then looked up, but there beneath her veil was the face of Mother Kali. "Prasad," he cried out and ran downstairs as fast as he could. After Swami Prabhavananda's passing, many of us, but myself in particular, would spend 2 weeks every year with Swami Ashishananda at the Portland Center. He had a very different temperament from Swami Prabhavananda, my teacher, but these Swamis each gave such uplifting teachings, unforgettable lessons in life, cherished sacred memories, and conveyed such a spiritual mood that left indelible impressions I carry within me to this day. And they transcended any personal idiosyncrasies or prefabricated mold for how we might think a holy personality should act or appear. For example, Swami Ashishananda was the embodiment of frugality. He insisted nothing be wasted to the extreme. Leftovers were served again and again and again until finally and thankfully they disappeared. If fruits from the supermarket were bruised or defective in any way, they were returned and exchanged at the store. And thankfully, the store manager knew Mrs. Vera Edwards, Swami Ashishananda's right-hand devotee, very well. She was simply fulfilling the wishes of her old, venerable Swami. Swami loved to cook rice pudding for shrine offering, but he would stretch the recipe. For example, by adding leftover Oreo cookie crumbs so that every bit of leftovers was used up and there was plenty for everyone. He was so original. Plastic bags were washed and reused innumerable times until they developed holes in them and eventually had to be thrown out. During Karma Yoga, which was every day except on Sundays, outdoors, Swami would routinely take an old broom to sweep the temple parking lot, the bristles of which were worn to the wood. How could Swami sweep debris with such a broom? But he refused to throw it away. In fact, when an efficiency-minded guest devotee from Southern California replaced the worn-out broom, the leaking hose, and the dilapidated rakes, Swami gave him a full-throated scolding. You have no right to do these things. But then later, he softened and explained to the terrified devotee, you see, these things, the hoses, the brooms, all of it, they are like old dear friends, and you can't just throw them away. Swami's own appearance spoke of such frugality in clothing. Sometimes one could easily mistake him for a homeless person. Not in this particular photograph, but there were other styles of clothing that he wore. If it weren't for the fact that he was usually surrounded by a group of conventionally dressed devotees when he went out sightseeing or walking. When he went out walking, he wore a beret that Swami Pravrajika had given him years before, and it was partially torn when I knew him. But rather than discarding it, Swami placed a clean handkerchief in the hole of the beret because he cherished the memory of his brother monk. So the same with his worn, oversized overcoat, which is in the picture here, that Swami Nikhilananda had gifted him. Though it was too big for him, he would never discard it or give it away. There are so many cherished memories of Swami Ashishananda. Holy Mother's cat was one such memory. Swami did not allow his monks or devotee women, the close devotee women who lived in the center's houses for dedicated single women, to own a pet. But one day, a cat wandered onto the property, dehydrated, hungry, and dying of leukemia. Daily, Swami nursed the cat by giving it Ganges water and Mahaprasad. Mahaprasad is considered the great sanctified offering. The Mahaprasad, the dry rice offering from the Puri Jagannath temple that Sri Ramakrishna used to take 1 or 2 grains of every day and prescribe that to his disciples as well. The cat recovered. What happened next? Swami Ashishananda permitted Holy Mother's cat everywhere on the society's property, including the shrine. The monks were told to organize daily patrols so that it wouldn't wander off the property. Swami used to address the cat as Kitty, and he insisted it be present for all his lectures and classes. Why? Kitty is my best student, he told me. And he explained that the cat could actually feel the tanmatras, the vibrations, the spiritual vibrations in the temple and from his spiritual talks. It was Swami's conviction that was enough for its spiritual progress. When I pressed Swami further, he admitted that he even gave his pet student the Shiva mantra. Holy Mother's cat finally died, and I happened to be that year at the center. The cat died at the veterinary hospital. Mrs. Vera Edwards and I were there. It was due to kidney failure. We brought the cat's body back to the center and into the shrine. Swami knelt with the cat in his arms before the large shrine photo of Holy Mother. I watched from the doorway. The tenderness of that moment left an indelible impression. After 10 or 15 minutes, Swami arose and left the shrine. He then announced to us that there would be a memorial service for Holy Mother's cat and mandatory attendance for the monks and all the devotees present. The memorial service took place in the garden. A grave was dug by the monks. Swami chanted, prayers were given, and everyone present offered a flower. There were a dozen people present. The next day, when Swami was in the shrine pantry, he told me, referring to Holy Mother's cat, you know, it is better that they go away than that they die. He then disclosed, when I would be out gardening and watering the plants, the kitty would suddenly dash out from under the plants. I miss that. He then shared that through its association with the Swami, much was done for the kitty spiritually. Its consciousness had developed from where it was. As he explained, to the borderline of human evolution in its next life. But, Swami added, it's very difficult to explain. That private moment and the soft expression in Swami's eyes is one of the memories I cherish most when recalling my days with Swami Ashishananda. I felt privy to be near such a great soul at such an intimate moment. Swami Pravrajika also used to tell us that any person or any creature that ventured onto our temple grounds was blessed. Shortly after that memorial service, a bird flew into the center's window and died. Swami Ashishananda told the monks to get a shovel and dig a grave. A bystander tittered, and Swami whirled around. No creature that comes on this property is insignificant. And there was a pin drop silence that made a deep impression on all present. Once a devotee doctor from New York sent Swami a letter, and Swami accumulated letters, often unread. Then after 6 months, he would throw them away. He had no time to respond to a huge worldwide correspondence. And in his later years, there were devotees from all over the world that would come on pilgrimage to the Portland Center to be near Swami Ashishananda. Well, 6 months later, the doctor phoned. Swami, she said, remember that letter I sent you? There was a check in it. Fortunately, the doctor had guessed what had happened. when the cashed check didn't show up on her bank statement. Swami rummaged through the pile of discarded letters and luckily retrieved the check donation. Such humorous stories only endeared the Swami to his devotees. Swami Ashishananda didn't like taking money from monastics who stayed as guests at the center there. And in Southern California, we in Santa Barbara, many of us went up and stayed a couple of weeks at a time. We were regular visitors, and we felt duty-bound to leave donations, and our Mother Superior insisted. So Swami figured the bill to the penny, $3 a day donation. That was all. And he would return any amount that exceeded that. Swami Ashishananda taught in various unexpected ways. Routinely, he arranged for the center's devotees to accompany out-of-town guests to places within Portland. Multnomah Falls, the Rose Garden, and the Grotto was one of his favorite. When Swami asked me to go along, being tired from the day's air travel, I tried to excuse myself. I'm too tired, I said. But Swami corrected me. You, meaning all women, are replicas of the Divine Mother. Never say you are tired. What a beautiful teaching. So simple. And it made such a deep impression. He taught us to live what we were aspiring towards, to reach higher and go beyond any sense of fatigue, beyond the body idea altogether, which he himself exemplified to an extraordinary degree. Swami used to request me to make flower arrangements for the shrine at the Portland Center. One day I noticed in one shrine wall niche where Mother Kali's image and painting were daily worship, Swami had placed a disciple's letter and the monthly bulletin behind her photograph. Such a simple, direct method of offering, and a precious reminder to surrender everything to the Lord. In daily worship, at the time of the food offering, Swami would leave his seat of worship and enter the shrine pantry next to the shrine and personally chop up the fruit offering. He used a large knife and was meticulous and deliberate in the chopping. And in the shrine, we could hear the loud, rhythmic chop, chop, chopping noise, and it became a sweet part of my meditation. At this time, he told me he would remember his golden years with Swami Saradananda at the Udbodhan. He'd remember and mentally relive the service he'd given Swami Saradananda. For example, pumping water for his bath and other chores, and how Swami would call out to him, "Kiran, bring the water." Once I had to leave the shrine at that time to deliver a message to the Swami. And I went to the threshold of the pantry. And when Swami looked up at me, I'll never forget the indrawn, bliss-filled expression in his eyes. To Swami, my form was at that moment merely a shadow play compared to the reality he was speaking, he was experiencing within himself. Such a powerful, indrawn, and blissful expression, reliving memories of his days serving Swami Saradananda at the Udbodhan had taken him there. I spoke just a few words, then came away quickly so as not to disturb his mood. Sometimes Swami Ashishananda used the shrine as an arena for his scoldings. Once during the worship, Swami went into the shrine pantry and called out to the president of the board, Mr. Bush, who was meditating in the shrine, Mr. Bush, buy me a one-way ticket to Chicago. Mr. Bush quickly executed Swami's request. And then his voice rang out from the shrine pantry. Anyone who does not come to the shrine to meditate does not belong in this center, referring to a novice who had habitually stayed in his room during the noon worship. That was a strong teaching. And the young inmate who failed to keep regular meditation hours in the shrine was dispatched back to Chicago. Swami Ashishananda was uncompromising when it came to regularity in meditation. And in this way, he taught how our spiritual life revolves around the shrine. Swami was a late night person, and he was also a late riser in the morning at 8:30 a.m. One evening, I happened to have a 10 p.m. interview upstairs in the monastery in a small room which he called Buddha Hall. And I remember as I climbed those stairs, I felt privy to the sanctity of the monastery atmosphere at that late hour, where the sadhu of Swami Ashishananda's stature had lived so many years. It seemed the building itself was a replica of his inner realm. The walls seemed to vibrate with consciousness. That night, Swami talked about the efficacy of worship. One evening past midnight, he was putting the Lord to bed in the shrine. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our tradition, the Lord is ceremonially awakened in the morning with an arati, and after arati is put to bed, and sometimes with little blankets that go over the picture. So one evening past midnight, he was putting the Lord to bed in the shrine, covering the holy pictures with cloths. And suddenly he heard Sri Ramakrishna's voice, Kiran, Kiran, your hair. Swami had bent too low over the votive candle in front of the master's photo. And Sri Ramakrishna's warning voice drew his attention to his hair, which had caught on fire. And quickly he put it out. Swami Ashishananda shared such personal examples of how our worship becomes living. To Swami, daily worship was conversation with God, natural and real. And that God, our chosen ideal, always protects us. On this late evening interview, Swami shared such an intimate truth. It was a rare and special moment. Swami never let anybody touch the shrine when he was in the center. He always performed the worship, arthritic as he was, unless he was invited to another center. Then one of his monks performed the daily worship. When Swami performed the worship, a monk prepared the sandal paste and placed the shrine vessels on the altar. Devotees picked flowers, washed, and arranged them. Nobody was allowed to touch the holy pictures, even though they were splattered with water. Only Swami was allowed to touch them. One day, when Swami was kneeling before the shrine, he called out, "Who has touched the shrine? Who has touched the shrine?" Swami knew just by looking at the shrine that someone had violated his cardinal rule. Swami Ashishananda cherished a mystic relationship with his shrine photos. He explained to me one day, I am not like the Devi Giriji in Uttakashi, no photo of Sri Ramakrishna. I have lawns to mow. Yes, he mowed lawns, and flowers to please Sri Ramakrishna. He is more than a photo. He is a living presence. When devotees would arrive at the center, the first thing he would do, he would bless them with a special photo of Holy Mother in the shrine pantry. And one day, he divulged in a private interview, there is one photo of Holy Mother that is very special to me. I think, what a special one. She appeared to me as Mahakarana, the embodiment of compassion. I cannot do without that one. Then he went on to explain, I was in the stormy seas. He was crossing the ocean to come to America from India for the first time, all alone. And she came and protected me. I can never forget. This photo has more manifestation of power. The presence in this photo is felt more. Swami trained his devotees how to pick and prepare the flowers for the worship. One day, he looked out his monastery window and saw I was doing all the flower picking as the trainees stood by watching me. Start picking the flowers, he called out through the window to the trainee. You learn only by doing. You learn only by doing. Somehow, these simple teachings have stuck with me through the years. Swami's scoldings were famous. He reached a pitch that could shatter glass, I swear. And he was also so original. For example, on Thanksgiving Day, he scolded an entire nation. How? Just before that day, I had given him a Native American peace pipe from my family's collection for his Native American shrine at the center's Scopus retreat. There in the center, at the top of the monastery stairs, Vera Edwards and I at the bottom, the drama unfolded. Swami paced back and forth as he called out to his listeners, I prefer to call this day Thankless Day, not Thanksgiving Day. And then followed a litany of scoldings against the American nation. Our values, our atrocities committed against the Native Americans. Swami explained, we all have our individual karma, our family karma, our national karma, and a world karma. Thus, on Thanksgiving Day, Swami Ashishananda was doing his part to erase some of our national karma. Swami Ashishananda could also be gentle as a flower petal. Once he told me, a father loves most his prodigal son, not the son who is always good. He nurtured his flock of devotees with prasad he cooked himself, gave loving advice, trips to the beach, yes, retreats at Scopus, private interviews, follow-up phone calls, and prayers for his disciples. For the visiting nuns and the single women living near the center, he sent Vera Edwards out to buy his gift of blouses for all of them. And he would offer them a huge stack in the shrine to Holy Mother, and then give them to each of us. Those gifts were treasures. He played an intimate part in each devotee's life. And once Swami admitted to me, though I scold the Americans, I sometimes say that I do not care for them. That's part of his scolding. I love them. I love the Americans. And a testament to this statement was after coming to America, he never returned to India, not even for a visit. Swami trained by example. He was absolutely unapproachable during the Karma Yoga time when he was gardening, watering the plants or sweeping. And he was passionate that all devotees should contribute to the center's landscape and garden. And as Swami Saradananda so beautifully explained at our general board meeting, in our tradition, we consider the center as the body of Sri Ramakrishna. During this time, Swami wore his fiercest expression. Nobody dared to approach him when sweeping with his long-handled, bristleless broom, watering the plants, dragging the hose, trudging around the building. He was concentrated, his brows furrowed in a scowl. So when I asked devotees why he was like this in the garden, nobody knew, and no one dared to ask him. So one day I asked him, and he replied, "While working, I'm meditating on a shloka of the Gita. I take one Gita shloka and think about that. Or sometimes I think deeply about the subject for my Sunday lecture. This is called contemplation." That taught me how to use my time wisely. It came from Swami Turiyananda's teaching. If you really want to study, Swami Turiyananda said, take one shloka and meditate on it every day for a week. That is real study. And Swami Ashishananda put that teaching into practice, which I felt fortunate to witness for myself. Through the years, I have kept journals of teachings from some of the great Swamis with whom I've had the privilege to associate with. So after my interviews with Swami Ashishananda, my private interviews with him, I would go into the shrine and record his teachings verbatim from memory. One day, after an interview with the Swami, I went to the library to record because it happened to be the time for the noon worship. Others were meditating, and one devotee kindly warned me that Swami would also want me in the shrine at that time, but I stayed to finish my journal entry. It was a cloudy day, and I was straining my eyes to write. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were Swami's. He stopped at the library door. Will he scold me for not meditating at this time, I wondered. What are you doing? He asked. Swami, I'm just writing down everything you told me today. Very good, he said, and switched on the light so that I could see better. This was one of those rare instances that Swami excused anyone from meditation. Today, years after Swami Ashishananda's passing, there are certain teachings that were not so prominent then, but have now become most useful and beneficial just by rereading my journal entries. His teachings were unique, personal, and multi-layered. And reading through my journals, I would marvel, wow, what an important message he gave then. And as the years rolled by, Swami Ashishananda shared more intimately when I was with him. Sometimes unrecorded reminiscences of the direct disciples or of Holy Mother. One day he described Mother's passing to me. Her body became so thin and emaciated, but after her Mahasamadhi, it was luminous like Mother Durga's. Before Belar Math was founded, Swami Vivekananda wanted to establish a woman's mat even before a monk's mat. Referring to this, Swami Ashishananda shared Swami Yogananda, who served as mother's attendant, and of course was a direct disciple of Ramakrishna, knew Swamiji planned to make mother the head of the Saradananda. So he told him, don't bring mother into the public. She won't live long if you do. That was all. One beautiful moment with Swami took place right after my sannyas in 1984, where I was allowed to spend several weeks with the Swami in Portland. And he talked privately with me about the sannyas vows, their meaning, how powerful the mantras were, and what a mood that created. Out of the blue, I asked him, Swami, do you ever see Brahman? He laughed sweetly. Yes, but not when I have too many administrative responsibilities. Such a wonderful mood he was in. Have you ever felt sad or depressed? I asked him. Yes, when I am ill. Then the mind goes down a little. I'm not able to do the Lord's work. But at that time, I do some japa, and then the mind rises again. Swami Ashishananda was a mystic. When he came to Santa Barbara to administer monastic vows to some of our nuns, he would stay for a few days. One day he was relaxing at the convent dining table after lunch when one of our senior nuns asked him, Swami, when did you realize Holy Mother was the Divine Mother? In India or here in this country? Here, he said. Vera Edwards, a close devotee of the Swami and a wonderful saintly devotee, shared with me how she was once privy to an experience he received at the Portland Center's 120-acre densely wooded Scappoose retreat overlooking the Columbia River. It was after a lecture at the retreat and very dark when Swami asked Vera and her sister to drive him to the meditation cabin there, which is now in need of repair. He asked them to wait outside the cabin. Suddenly, they both felt a strong force and they were overawed. A few minutes later, Swami came out of the cabin and said he had seen Holy Mother and Swami Saradananda. Swami Ashishananda would occasionally send me to the Seattle Vedanta Center, especially when Swami Vivedishananda, Swami Brahmananda's disciple, was still alive. In the 1970s, Swami Vivedishananda visited the Vedanta Society of Southern California. And when he came to Santa Barbara, we asked him what was essential in spiritual life. He shared, learn to memorize scriptural verses and sacred songs. In your old age, when you can no longer see or hear, you will still be able to live in the holy company of what you have memorized. In the late 1970s, Swami Ashishananda sent me to the Seattle Center to have the darshan of Swami Vivedishananda, who lay in a coma after having suffered a stroke in 1974. He lived 6 years in a coma, beautifully cared for by his monks until his passing in 1980. When I entered his room, it was like a shrine. The atmosphere was so intense. And I then remembered the advice he had given us to memorize the sacred scriptures in order that they become our holy company when our senses fail us in later life. At that time, his attendant monk, Swami Manishananda, my contemporary, shared spiritual experience Swami Vivedishananda had at the beginning of his Seattle work, when the attendance remained small and he became discouraged. Ashishananda said, one day, Swami Brahmananda appeared as in a dream. His body expanded to become all-pervasive. Swami Vivedishananda then understood that his work was the Lord's work, and whatever he did or did not accomplish was ultimately his will, and his depression lifted. These associations with holy personalities tell the story of our lineage, and by reliving them in our mind, they open the door of the heart. They sink deep into our heart and give us a felt darshan, as they did with Swami Ashishananda when he used to relive his days with Swami Saradananda as he chopped the fruit prasad in the shrine pantry for his worship. For those who have not met the disciples of direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, we also can bring our spiritual lives alive. By reading and contemplating the divine Leela of Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, and the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, by meditating on those incidents, and by doing so, we personalize our spiritual life. We try to feel in our hearts that we are there with these great teachers, experiencing them firsthand. Sri Ramakrishna or Sri Sarada Devi are talking to us, instructing us, guiding us as a father or mother teaches their beloved child. And in doing that, we enrich ourselves and become a blessing to others. And so, dear friends, now we will have Arati, the waving of the lights.